Welcome to Pretty Lies and Alibis. Let's seek the truth and travel the long road to justice together. What you know, Alibiers, welcome to another episode of Pretty Lies and Alibis. I'm Gigi. Good to have you here. It's Thursday, January 29th. I hope you guys had a really good day. Sorry this is late. I had to run some groceries to my uncle who just got home from the hospital yesterday after having surgery. Had to do my running because apparently we're entering like a second ice age here in the South. We had ice last weekend. We got a snowpocalypse coming up, and they're even talking about another one next weekend. What is up, y'all? Bring on summer. If we get some good snow, expect some YouTube shorts of your girl sledding down the big hill near my house. That may be followed up with a video of me right before I go in for surgery. We will see. All right, we're going to jump into the afternoon session in the Brendan Banfield trial. When we broke for lunch, he had just finished up on direct, and he was on cross. And can I just say, if I had 3 words to sum up his time on the stand, I will say hot mess express. Lord have mercy. Let's jump in, y'all. On cross, the Commonwealth says this is the first time you told any story of what happened that day. You didn't tell the police that day in the bedroom, the hospital, or at the police station. He said he wasn't questioned by the police in the house or the driveway or the police station about what happened. You've had 3 years, and you didn't tell anybody what happened. Brendan said police did ask to speak to him at the hospital and then later through his attorney. You were given the chance to tell the court when you testified at Juliana's preliminary hearing, but you didn't. He said he was advised that defense of others isn't relevant at preliminary hearings, and his understanding was that he would be testifying at Juliana's trial. At the preliminary, you didn't even admit that Christine was your wife. He said he was instructed not to by his attorney. Now you're ready to tell us what happened? He says he was willing to at Juliana's trial, and he was waiting to testify at his trial, which he thought would be earlier. You didn't reach out to law enforcement to tell your story. And he interrupts her, and she's like, "Excuse me, I'm not finished. You haven't asked to tell how you tried to save your wife." He said he would have been willing to talk in any civil investigation through his agency. But did you do that? He said they didn't because the police did not want him to. Your affair began in August of 2022, and you took trips together and you communicated on Discord. He says yes. Why not with Facebook Messenger? He said Discord was his favorite messaging app. You said Juliana was nothing. This was just an affair and not a relationship. Brendan said it was a relationship, but it wasn't serious. He told her he loved her. He had feelings for her, but not as strong as the feelings he had for Christine. She brings in some Discord messages and says Juliana tried to break up with you, and he said she did a few times. In one message, she says, "I told you, I'm seeing other people. We spoke about this already. I won't go to New York with you and Valerie. I'm sure you two will have lots of fun." This upset you, didn't it? He said, "No." Prosecutor's like, "No. You beg her in the next few messages to talk to you." Brendan says those messages were on a different day. And the prosecutor's like, "It looks like it's within hours. Yeah, maybe after midnight, which is another day, but still." So they bring in a couple of the messages he wrote to her after she was in jail, professing his undying love for her. He said he was definitely in love with her starting in the summer of 2023. The Commonwealth points out this is just before she was arrested. He said that was the first opportunity they had to have a normal relationship. Y'all, I can't with this guy. He said before the murders, he was working, spending time with Christine. So before this period in time, he didn't have time. After the murders, they did. The prosecution says, in this, you're talking about the time you spent with her before Christine's death. And she quotes, "long, hot cuddles." Was that before? Brendan says, no, that was after. They were riding bikes, went to lunch, and got caught in the rain. In this paragraph, you say you came here and we fell in love. So this is before Christine's death. He said they had feelings for each other prior, but he wouldn't say at the level of love he had for his wife after 19 years. She puts up a handwritten message from Brendan to Juliana, and I paused this so I could write it down so we could read everything I could see. And it says, "When we have been through, have pain and suffering without you. Your conversations about leaving and letting me go and setting me free is the most painful. I hate them. They make me cry every time. You are irreplaceable. You're my person. I believe you will have the best life together, full of love, happiness, support, fun, laughter, romance, fulfillment. Sorry about the mess on the page as I'm crying while writing it. In another letter, he says she's his gym partner and he helped her to be the strongest person she's ever been in her life. You've never had a consistent partner before. And Brendan says yes, he was referring to him being her gym partner. The prosecutor says, you right? I'm obsessed with your happiness. And Brendan says yes. The prosecution says this is all after Christine had passed. He said, if you look, I also call her a hero because she saved my life that day. It's easier to fall in love with somebody who saved you. They bring in another love letter where they're talking about baby names for their future children. He said Juliana wanted to talk about it. You're contending these strong feelings like, let's be together forever, didn't exist before Christine died, and they didn't motivate you to kill your wife? He says they weren't together when Christine died. Did you need to kill your wife to get her back? And Brendan says definitely not. She moves on. You had affairs. One was with a woman named Danielle you met on a fetish site looking for sugar babies. He said he wouldn't call it a fetish site, and she's like, okay, well, what do you call it? So you were looking for a sugar baby? He said, I guess. It was more arranged, and that person already knew he was married. Another affair was with your best friend's wife, and he said, no, he's not my best friend. They weren't married or together at that point. The prosecutor asked, is that what they believed, or was that your perception? He said his understanding is she wanted to be with that guy, but they weren't together. Brendan and Christine were married at this time. The prosecution says Christine's apparent decision to have someone fake assault her. You're not aware of any phone or computer history that indicated that she was interested in this type of a relationship prior to January of 2023. Brendan said he knew she was interested, but he didn't know she was pursuing this again because it had been years. But he doesn't know of any internet history prior to January 2023. The prosecution asked if she had any other Facebook photo she could have used other than the bathing suit photo, and he doesn't know. Prosecutor said, you gave us 20 plus pictures yesterday that came from her Facebook. He said those did not come from him. Some appeared to be his photos, but those photos that were from yesterday were arranged for him, and some may have come from his mother, and some may have come from Christine's. He said they would share photos on Facebook Messenger. The prosecutor says, but in all the photos that you guys shared on Messenger, there wasn't any other photo she could have used as her profile picture where she wasn't in the bathroom. He said Christine can choose whatever photo she wanted. He has no clue. He said it looks like she took that picture that day and used it. When the solicitations occurred on FetLife, she was looking for someone to meet her on scene. No meetups, and she was only communicating when either you and Juliana were home. He said with what was presented in evidence, he wasn't home. Prosecutor said, but Juliana was, and he says he doesn't know where she was at those times. He says, we went through a lot of evidence that showed I wasn't home, and times they showed messages were logged into the email Juliana states she had no knowledge of. So if she's home or not, the only other person that's home is Christine. Commonwealth says, and most importantly, when you were not home. Brendan says it appears there were messages sent when he was, and then some when he wasn't. Prosecutor said, that's not what I asked, but he ended up and repeated that same answer. The person Christine picked was the person who would come to the house, not a hotel, unlike most others on FetLife. She moves on and says, you were there for your daughter's birth. Were you aware Christine received medications for her blood clotting disorder? He said during her pregnancy, they tested her and she didn't require meds for it, but they would monitor her during delivery. Are you aware she's a clotting disorder? Yes. In other words, the Commonwealth is saying she is not going to consent to something violent that would cause injuries to her where she has problems clotting. The Commonwealth said, when you set this whole thing up, and he interrupts and says he didn't. So she says, when Christine set this whole thing up on the 23rd, it was scheduled to occur minutes after you guys were leaving the house. Juliana and Valerie were going to the zoo and you were going to work. When she's setting it up, you didn't share your plan to go to your meeting early that day. He says she knew about the meeting and knew Juliana was going to the zoo. She had planned that 10 days earlier. So the prosecution said she scheduled Joe to come at 7:20. He says, I don't know what time she scheduled. You said you were not aware she took the 24th off until the day before. But that's not accurate because her parents were scheduled to come because you would be out of town. He said he thought they were coming in the evening and then she would come home for work. It wasn't stated Christine was going to be home. His experience was she was scheduled to work that day. Prosecutor says her parents were coming to dinner. He said he didn't think so. They were just traveling through and he thinks they were headed to Florida. It would be your contention on the morning of the planned tryst, she turned her phone off and put it in the kitchen drawer. He says, I don't know. I saw her with her phone when I was getting ready around 6:30 that morning. But the prosecutor says, well, your PI found she was not on her phone at 6:30 or any time before or after. He said, I saw her with her phone. It was on the bed with the laptop. Prosecutor, you leave, you go to McDonald's and you're in the bathroom for 7 minutes. You don't leave the bathroom until Juliana calls you at 7:37 and you don't call 911. He says, no. You don't tell her to call 911. You don't run out of the bathroom. You walk to your car, and he said he was walking faster than normal. The prosecutor asked, well, if she's having an affair, then why go back at all? Why not tell Juliana, go to the zoo? It's just another affair. He said he wouldn't tell Juliana about Christine's affairs. Why not? You're having an affair. He said he and Juliana really did not discuss Christine. When you arrive at the house, Juliana brings Valerie in. Brendan says she followed me. I didn't tell her to. But at that point, you think you're busting up on your wife having sex with some guy. Brendan said that was one of the considerations. So why wouldn't you tell Juliana to take your daughter back outside? He said, I thought they were safe there and he didn't perceive any danger. But he did tell her to stay at the car. But you're law enforcement. You're not going to tell them to stay at the car to be safe? Brendan says, I understand that. And it was a mistake not to send them back out. He said he's thought about that many times. The prosecutor asks, you didn't draw your gun until you heard sex noises? Brendan said, when I was on the main floor, I heard what I did. But later, when going up the stairs, I changed my thought after hearing what I believe were strikes too sharp to... And then he just kind of loses his train of thought there. There's a lock on the outside of the basement door. She's talking about the interior that goes down there. You didn't lock it? He said he's not sure he ever has used that lock. The prosecutor says it would have kept your babysitter and your child from following you to where bad things were now happening. He said, I just didn't think of the lock. We didn't use it. You followed your training. You pulled your weapon. And when you saw that Juliana followed you, you're worried bad things are happening. Did you tell her to call 911 or to go get Valerie out of the house? Brendan said he wasn't worried about Juliana at that point. The prosecutor says, well, you weren't worried about Valerie either at that point, right? He said, I didn't think. She was on the top of my mind when I thought Christine was being injured. You get to the room and see what's happening. Joe's behind your naked wife with something metal in his hand, and you yell, police. You didn't shoot. You didn't yell for Juliana, who was behind you, to call 911. He said he didn't know she came upstairs at that point. Prosecutor says, but you said the foyer is very echoey. She would have heard if you yelled, but you didn't do that? He said he was focused on the tense situation in front of him. So this man planned to kill your wife, having left this discoverable trail on the internet? Brendan says, I don't know what he was thinking. Did he say anything to you about stabbing your wife on the spur of the moment? Brendan said it seemed to be in response to me saying he would be arrested. Prosecutor's like, all right, so let's nail this down. I thought you said you enter the room, the knife's in his hand, the other hand maybe on her neck. You see blood in her hair and she's already bleeding, correct? He said, I think there was already blood in her hair. So he had already stabbed her before you came in. And he says, I believe so. She starts another question and you saw him stab her. She throws up 2 fingers, but he interrupts and says, I guess, I'm not sure. And the prosecutor's like, oh, okay. It could have been at the same time that he already has the knife to her neck. So I don't know if it's when the knife is already to her neck that the blood goes to her hair. You said when you came in, Christine was yelling or moaning and you thought she was being stabbed. Then she went to her left and Joe was doing a forward movement. That would be the first stab you saw. He said the knife is inside her hair at the location of her neck and he couldn't tell. She was yelling and in pain, so I think maybe she already had the knife pressed to her. The prosecutor says, but you heard the medical examiner. She had 7 stab wounds and a cutting wound. Brendan says he doesn't know the number off the top of his head, but it sounds familiar. You said she's already bleeding, and you see forward movement, but you can't tell what happened. There's the exchange between you and Joe. You tell him to let her go at least one more time, and it appears he forcefully stabs her. She spins away towards you and lands on her stomach on the ground. So there's one clear stab. Brendan said it's not towards me, it's away from me. Prosecutor said, but that's one moment you see Joe stab her. He says yes, and then downward as she went to the floor. Prosecutor said that's 2, but there's 5 more. So when did he stab her those times? Brendan said the knife is in her hair, and I don't know what happened before I got there. Prosecutor says, Christine says to you, he's got a knife. Put more pressure on the neck. She tells you she can't see. And all this talking is happening with what has to be all 7 wounds in her neck. And he says yes. She shows him photos of the wounds on Christine's left and right side of her neck. And she's chatting with you with these wounds? He says yes, but her voice is very hoarse and she was having difficulty speaking, but she was talking to me. Going back to Joe, you weren't aware if his plan was to kill her or if it was something that just happened while he was there. Brendan says, I don't know, Joe, aside from what happened. But you heard during trial that he texted with someone on Christine's laptop that morning, and he laid out his expected arrival time. He doesn't remember. Did you catch he stopped at Walmart and bought lubricant, and he may or may not murder her? And Brendan says yes, and I don't know why he bought personal lubricant. This guy's not the sharpest tool in the shed, y'all. He left his car parked in your driveway in broad daylight, which you saw, and he left his 2 cell phones in his car per the instructions your wife gave him on Telegram. He said he saw the pictures, he saw the 2 phones. You said you initially heard what you thought were sex noises, but we know from the physical evidence recovery kits taken during autopsy from both Joe and Christine that there was no DNA or semen from Joe found on Christine. Yes. How long of time do you think passed between your instructions to put down the knife, let her go, your wife is bleeding before you shoot him? He said not that long, maybe a minute. She says if we count out 60 seconds, and she starts but doesn't go all the way. You didn't shoot him? He said no, not prior to Christine going to the floor. And at the point she goes to the floor, we're at least 6 stab wounds in. He said it was hard to see. He said, I'm also aiming my sights down at Joe. I'm not exactly focused on Christine. You have a narrow view when you're aiming down a firearm. And you just couldn't pull the trigger, could you? And he said he was afraid. You're a trained law enforcement officer, correct? He said, my shooting record is on the lower end for qualification, and there's very little space there, so I was afraid of hitting her too. Joe didn't have a gun, and you had handcuffs that you did not use to apprehend him. Of course, Brendan says, looking back, he should have cuffed him after the first shot. They go through a line of questioning about him going to the range often, and then she points out he had only been one time in April and May of that year, then October with Juliana, and then the last time he was there was 2020. He said he was going to another range. The department had a contract, and so he didn't have to pay. But when that contract ended, he went back to the other place. Why did you teach Juliana to shoot? He said it was something they could do together outside of the house when he could or she could, and they'd do things together, and she would just want to come with him. You gave her the code to the safe in your bedroom? He said Juliana realized it was the same code as their door when he was putting his things away for the day. The prosecutor's like, so your gun safe code is the same code as Juliana, your wife, your kid? He said no, they had their own codes. So you gave her your code? He said being next to me, going in and out of the house is how she knew his code. You didn't think it was a good idea to change your code once she saw it? He said he didn't think to. As part of your law enforcement training, you don't think it's a bad idea for others to know the code to your gun safe? And he pulls the I'm not the only one card. He said he's aware others in his department whose families know their codes. Did you have life-saving training as part of your law enforcement background? And he said a bit. Your training says Juliana should call 911 while you're caring for Christine. But when she hadn't, you didn't think she should? He said he didn't realize she hadn't called because he was looking at Christine. You're not aware she hung up 15 minutes before you talking to them on the phone? He didn't know she made the first call. He said his understanding was that first call happened when she was in the basement. Now, according to Juliana, that first call happened after Christine told her to call 911 right before Brendan allegedly murdered her. While attending to Christine and changing hand placements, you didn't think to use the comforter or the towels to stop the blood flow? He said it wasn't until 911 told him to. He said pressure is a different form of treatment they were taught and is also what Christine was doing. The prosecutor says to put pressure on a wound so large your finger went inside of it, and he says yes. When first responders arrive, you're on video holding her neck with your bare hands, and he said, I think so. So where had the towels and blanket gone? He said it was next to him, and the prosecutor says, or under your knees. He says he doesn't know, and that was it for cross. But that was such a precise cross because it was rapid fire, calling him out. And that way you also don't fatigue the jury. You just hit the important parts, move on because the guy cooked his own goose. On redirect, you were asked about your decision to delay calling 911. When did you think 911 was necessary? He said once he was in the room and he realized it, his hands were on his firearm and he had already confronted Joe. He wasn't in a position at any time to call 911 because after that, he was helping Christine, so he told Juliana to call. Okay, so this next line of questioning, y'all, really bothers me because I don't like it when they can bring in things about a dead person who cannot dispute this, but here we go. What did you know about fetish behavior Christine was involved in back in 2014? Brendan said in New York, she had an affair where she was involved in a BDSM relationship for a month or two. He said he saw her in the bedroom, he saw her with bruises, and he didn't know she had those. He asked her about it, and I guess she told him, and he suggested they go back to therapy. He said he questioned her enjoyment of it, and he said it was an emotional conversation. He said she was interested in sexual violence. She was a sexual assault nurse examiner for men and women. He said she would bring her documents home, so he was aware she seemed to look at them relatively often. He said the time frame for this was 2012 to 2017. They were in counseling in 2013 and went back again in 2014. He also said Christine was stalked by someone for a few weeks. It was someone she had been in a brief relationship with, and she was scared. He said also when she was in the BDSM relationship, allegedly, other than the bruising, he noticed she was walking more stiffly. You said Juliana was a hero for you. What did you mean? He said, I believe Joe was still a threat to me and everyone in the house when he got up and struck me. The knife and the firearm were on the floor. Juliana's actions potentially saved the rest of us. One thing I noticed about his direct and cross, he did not throw Juliana under the bus one bit to where Juliana threw him under the bus and backed over him for good measure. To me, sounds like he's still in love with her, but that's just my 2 cents. Juliana broke up with you prior to this. When was this? He said it's complicated. She was upset when he and Christine went on a cruise in November, and that started a lot of her anxiety and anger with him. For Christmas, she went to a hotel because she did not want to see Brendan at Christmas with his family. In February, she indicated she was going back on the dating apps and that would be the end of them. When the murders happened, they were not in a relationship. And he said she made clear they were not going to be any longer. What did you think when you decided to shoot Joe? He was an imminent danger to Christine, and that was the best way to stop him. So that was it for redirect. He got off the stand. For me, I've never seen a defendant get on the stand and do well. And this just ended up being a big old dumpster fire. Also, his demeanor changed when the prosecutor was cross-examining him, as it typically does too. His face color changed a lot, and he just looked very unnerved because he's been over the questions his attorney is going to ask him, but cross-exam's a wild card. So after he was finished, they bring back Nick Barrero. He was the guy that testified remotely. He was still remote today. He's the audio-video forensic analyst that was brought on to talk about the 911 call. Gets really technical. They play a clip in like super slow-mo, and it's like, wah, wah. You know the sound I'm talking about. He said what he heard on the 911 call was consistent with dog groaning sounds and not Joe Ryan. On cross, is it possible the sound you heard could have also been a human? And he said, yeah, it's possible. You were given a 1 hour and 25-minute long segment of the dog to compare to 1.4 seconds of the 911 call. Yes. So in the approximate 5,100 seconds of the dog Lily groaning, you found a 6-second sample that matched. He said no. Much of the exemplar, there was actually no groaning except for that 1.4 seconds. Redirect was pointless, and then the defense rests. For rebuttal, they call in Detective Stephen Augustine with the Fairfax County Police Department. He listened to the 911 clip as well as the Lily clip. Man, this was such a teaser. He said in the end, he heard a human voice say, there is an objection. It's sustained and we don't hear what he heard. But I have to say, Brendan looked like he was silently freaking out during sidebar, but I guess we'll never know. Get this. After lunch, somebody approached the Commonwealth and asked if it was too late to testify. However, this was within earshot of 2 jurors, so they moved away. And guess who this was, y'all? It was an IRS criminal investigator. Brendan's supervisor, who heard Brendan's testimony yesterday regarding that meeting he had that could possibly end in a promotion and why he left the house early. The last witness of this trial, Thomas Patrick Smith. He is a special agent with the IRS and Brendan's boss. He takes the stand. February 24th, 2023. Did you have any plans that morning? The witness said he was in Baltimore for work and not scheduled to meet with Brendan. Brendan's other supervisor was out of the country, and the next person in line was in Georgia that day. The Commonwealth says Brendan testified he had a meeting with his manager that morning. Did you have a meeting scheduled, or did Juliet have a meeting scheduled with Brendan? There is an objection that's sustained. They talk about how do you dress when you're having a big business meeting with a promotion pending. The witness says semi-formal. Do you wear jeans or sneakers? No. He did not talk to Brendan the morning of the murders, and he said he was surprised when he got a call indicating Brendan discharged his weapons and 2 people were dead. That was it for direct. So the big message is his alibi just totally imploded. There was never a meeting. On cross, essentially what the defense tried to do was say that in Brendan discharging his firearm, it created more work for his supervisor. He said, yeah, we had to contact upper management. The Treasury inspector is their internal affairs go-to, and they do an investigation to see if the discharge of the weapon was appropriate. Was it extra work for you? He said, yeah, I had to make calls and talk to several people I normally wouldn't have. The defense names a bunch of people who were interviewed by detectives, and it was all kind of pointless, and that is where we ended. So the feed will be live at 9 a.m. tomorrow. That will be for finalizing jury instructions. Not the most exciting stuff to watch, but the chat room will be open. Come hang out with us. We have a great time before trial, cutting up and chewing the fat and talking about whatever. However, closings will begin at 10 a.m. Think we got a verdict tomorrow. We'll put this baby to bed and wrap this up before Snowmageddon 2026 here in Greenville, South Carolina. Y'all, what a day. I have seen some doozies on the stand. Jodi Arias might be the biggest hot mess I've ever seen, and I was there for some of that. I've probably seen worse than this, but this is up there, maybe in my top 5. Holy moly, y'all. All right, in the comments, let me know what's your estimate for how long this jury deliberates and guilty or not guilty. Let me hear you. One more reminder, if you're not subscribed, go ahead and hit that subscribe button. Like the video and share it with your friends. All of that is free to do, and it helps this channel so much. I appreciate y'all. Hope you have a good rest of your evening. We'll see you soon.